I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos is representing Canada at a special meeting of the World Health Assembly that opened today amid the emergence of the new COVID-19 Omicron variant. The World Health Organization wants the Assembly to develop an international treaty to help prevent and fight future pandemics. It is praising Botswana and South Africa for quickly alerting the world to the presence of the Omicron variant, warning that the countries should not be punished with travel bans. All right, well, meanwhile, Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health reports that doctors are investigating 4 more possible cases of the COVID-19 Omicron variant, 2 in Hamilton and 2 in Ottawa. These potential cases are in addition to the 2 reported over the weekend in Ottawa in people who landed in Montreal after recently traveling to Nigeria. Dr. Kieran Moore says the province is looking at its strategy for 3rd COVID-19 vaccine doses and other measures to better protect people from the variant. Quebec health officials have also confirmed a case of the Omicron variant of COVID-19. Canadians are being advised to prepare for a weather whiplash this winter. Weather Network meteorologist Chris Scott says La Niña conditions will result in drastic shifts in temperatures and precipitation. British Columbia and most of the prairies will see heavy precipitation. This while Ontario and Quebec can expect a battle between seasonal highs and lows with stormy winter weather and extended mild periods. Atlantic Canada should expect below normal snowfall and above normal temperatures. BC's Public Safety Minister is advising against non-essential travel in the coming days. This comes as the province braces for the 3rd in a trio of heavy rainstorms. Mike Farnworth also suggests people prepare for emergencies by carrying food, water, warm clothes, blankets, and well-stocked emergency kits in their vehicles. Officials warn that the next storm could reach intensities similar to those seen in the downpour that destroyed highways and flooded communities 2 weeks ago. A 13-year legal battle between CP Rail and the Saskatchewan government that is scheduled to wrap up next month moves to the provincial legislature today. The railway is suing the province for $341 million over a clause in an 1880 contract. They are arguing for a return of taxes paid to the province since 2002 and a declaration that future taxes are not payable. The tax exemption was granted in exchange for an agreement to build a transcontinental railway. It became part of the Saskatchewan Act in the Constitution. The provincial government wants to amend the Constitution as it relates to the Saskatchewan Act, repealing the section that exempts CP from paying the taxes. Ottawa is expected to reintroduce a bill today to ban conversion therapy. If passed, the legislation would outlaw practices that seek to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. The move would potentially close loopholes that emerged the last time such legislation came before Parliament, while also fulfilling a Liberal campaign promise. The previous bill, known as C6, won backing from most MPs, but there was strong opposition from more than half of the Conservative caucus. 11 schools and 2 early learning centers in New Brunswick will pilot new French second language programs for Anglophone students this school year. Education Minister Dominic Cardy says all students should be able to converse in both official languages by the time they graduate high school. He says it's hoped that the new programs will increase the chances of success for all students. New Brunswick is Canada's only officially bilingual province. Videos are circulating on social media of Quebec City police involved in a violent weekend arrest of 2 Black teenagers. Premier François Legault tweeted on Sunday that he is aware of the troubling footage and believes, quote, "We need to shed light on the event." Police say the videos are from an interaction that took place between November 26th and 27th. Videos show officers dragging, hitting, and pinning down 2 Black youths in the snow. A news release said the force is deeply concerned by the behavior of the officers and is investigating. Nova Scotia has established what's believed to be Canada's first 24-hour helpline exclusively for men. This was in response to an urgent need that arose as the COVID-19 pandemic took hold. Soon after the province was locked down in March 2020, men started calling Nova Scotia's 211 service for information about government and community services. The Family Service of Eastern Nova Scotia says it soon became clear that more men were actively seeking help as they struggled with job losses, relationship breakdowns, loneliness, anger, and anxiety. All right, we'll be right back with a look at the rising tensions between NATO and Russia over Ukraine. An interview with Dr. Balkan Devlin from the MLI Institute coming up next. Foreign ministers from the world's most powerful military alliance met in Latvia on Tuesday. NATO is warning Russia that any attempt to further destabilize Ukraine would be a costly mistake. Concern is growing that Russia could be preparing for an invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Moscow denies that, but NATO is worried about a Russian buildup of heavy equipment and troops near Ukraine's northern border. At the same time, Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned NATO against deploying troops and weapons to Ukraine, saying it represents a red line and would trigger a strong response. Well, with us to unpack the escalating situation is Dr. Balkan Devlin, Senior Fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
Now, both NATO and Russia are warning each other to stay out of the Ukraine. So what is the significance or strategic importance of Ukraine to both of these military powerhouses?
I think it's important to note first that there is not really a two sides or both whataboutism into this. NATO cooperation with Ukraine is as a result of the government's invitation and deepening relations between different bilateral NATO nations, as well as an institution with Ukraine, while the Russian demands are precisely what they are. They are demands on a sovereign state that try to create their own on sphere of influence that would include Ukraine. For Russia, for both historical reasons and for political reasons, Ukraine was perceived as falling under the sphere of influence of Russia. But of course, after the Soviet Union, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the rise of an independent Ukraine, Ukraine, like any other country, and the Ukrainians do have a right to chart their own way and would like to be part of the Euro-Atlantic structures. And that is where the struggle is. The Russians, Kremlin particularly, don't want to accept that basic fact.
And both sides here are a warning of consequences. How likely are both of these sides going to respect each other's warnings?
I think it is important to, again, note that what NATO is warning is about is for Russia not to violate Ukrainian sovereignty, as it did back in 2014 when it invaded Ukraine and illegally annexed Crimea, and continued to support puppet regimes in eastern Ukraine, which are under, for all practical purposes, under Russian occupation. So it's kind of rich for Vladimir Putin to claim that further increase in tensions are due to NATO or Ukrainian activities. But it is important. So in that sense, NATO support for Ukraine and Ukrainian sovereignty and independence is an important notion to make. I would point out that what seems to be happening right now is that Vladimir Putin and Kremlin seem to lost any hope of influencing Ukraine's future through domestic instability, through exerting pressure in places like Donbass. So might be considering a military intervention as a last resort to reassert what they feel as their sphere of influence.
All right, Dr. Devlin. Well, NATO is warning of consequences, and so is Russia. So what kind of consequences could they be referring to?
So basically, of course, the worry is that this would lead to a war in Europe. Now, I don't think we will be seeing a major full-scale European-wide war. There is always the particular danger. But what really sort of concerns NATO and Ukraine is a limited incursion by Russian forces. An invasion probably will be limited in scope. And of course, the Russian warnings are precisely that. If you don't give us what we want, we might invade. Basically, blackmailing both NATO and Ukraine to push for their own political purposes. So what they are warning about, the consequences are basically war in Europe.
All right, just about a minute left here, Doctor, but let's touch on the NATO foreign ministers meeting today in Latvia. They were there to discuss this very situation. So give us an overview of what has been discussed so far.
I mean, it started today. I think there will be multiple issues that needs to be talked out. One of them is Ukraine and increasing tensions in the border and the Russian buildup and the pre-positioning of troops and material that are concerning for Ukraine and for NATO. So how to react and how to support Ukraine through an arms sale, through political and diplomatic means is one of them. One thing is quite clear, that we will not see NATO troops in Ukraine. Ukraine is not a NATO member, and it's very unlikely that we will see Ukrainian NATO troops being positioned over there. Of course, there are other issues, including Belarus and Lukashenko's increasing gray zone aggression towards our allies in the Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania, as well as Poland. So that will be one of the issues.
In a rare public speech, Richard Moore, the head of the UK's Foreign Intelligence Service, says China is MI6's single greatest priority, along with Russia and Iran. And he's not alone. The commander of NORAD is warning that China, along with Russia, are developing new methods of attack. But Beijing also has other ways in which it is seeking to shape the world. These efforts are not only limited to national governments, but also target the subnational level, along with public and private sectors. A recent report from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies takes a deeper look at the influence efforts by the Chinese Communist Party in its publication titled All Over the Map. And with us to unpack this is one of the authors of the publication, Mr. Nathan Pekarzik, Senior Fellow at the FDD. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
So firstly, can you give our viewers an overview of how the CCP is seeking to extend its influence around the world?
Party pursues a united front that combines private sector influence as well as engagement with state, local, provincial level authorities to curry influence, to seize positions of authority and information, access to information, and then to seize and deploy that influence through legislative means, through private sector and commercial means. And ultimately, we've been seeing this play out across the world in the way that domestic authorities and powers end up lobbying on behalf of Beijing.
All right, sir. Well, moving to your report, All Over the Map, what would you say are the major takeaways from it?
I think there needs to be an increased awareness among democratic, particularly federally organized republics across the world to this type of threat. There needs to be protection against the way that Chinese money, private sector influence, and government-backed actors can take control of political discourse, political action, as well as supply chains and technology flows.
And we know this report also touched on influence efforts at the subnational level. So tell us a little bit more about subnational levels and how these influence efforts are impacting them.
So when we look at authorities below the federal or national level, oftentimes elected officials and bureaucrats are optimizing for economic growth, for jobs, for inbound investment. China recognizes this, and they use these lower level authorities, subnational, provincial, state, local, to get around concerns that might exist at national levels about national security threats, whether that's in terms of investing into critical infrastructure or buying real estate near military positions, as well as in putting pressure on federal authorities, national level authorities, to not take a hard line against China's interests, whether that's in recognizing human rights abuses in China or whether that's protecting the commercial influence that Chinese companies and government players may have accrued.
And you mentioned that these negotiations are providing economic benefits at the subnational level. So are all of these influence attempts negative, or are there some positive aspects of it?
Typically, those positive aspects show up in short-term time horizons. So you may have increased levels of investment at a local level. You may have short-term job boons. But over the longer term, we see that these influence measures mean that long-term benefits accrue to the Chinese Communist Party and to Beijing, not to local economies. Look to the solar industry as one example where 10 years ago, Western players in the United States were dominant sources of technology and innovation, received investment that led to short-term boons, but over the past decade have wound up in a position where China dominates the overwhelming majority of this industry, have offshore jobs, have taken over supply chains. So those benefits seem to only accrue in the short term. The long-term strategic positioning that China seizes turns out to be just for Beijing's benefit, not for anyone else's.
All right, so just under a minute left here, but many of our viewers are aware of the Belt and Road Initiative. But what are some other ways that the Chinese government is expanding its influence in the U.S. and Canada in particular?
So direct investment, so buying technology, buying critical infrastructure, influencing data protocols, cross-border data flows, access to data that technology champions in the West may have access to, and then convening fora where elected officials from Canada and from the United States participate and go back to their home districts, their home provinces, and reiterate Chinese Communist Party talking points. This sort of softer method is something that I think that we shouldn't discount. I think that the shifting narrative, the use of Chinese Communist Party talking points is really a subversive measure that we see playing out over the long term and clearly directed by the Chinese Communist Party's ambitions here.
OPEC and allied oil-producing countries have voted to maintain a pattern of steady, modest monthly increases in oil releases to the rest of the world. That's even as the new COVID-19 Omicron variant is raising concerns about the global economic recovery from the pandemic. A senior oil markets analyst for Rystad Energy says OPEC Plus is ready to wait for more data on the efficacy of current vaccines on Omicron before making any significant changes to its output strategy. The U.S. federal government could be heading for a temporary shutdown. Republicans in Congress are poised to stall a must-pass funding bill. This comes as they force a debate on rolling back the Biden administration's COVID-19 vaccine mandates for some workers. Conservative Republicans in the House and Senate want to take a hardline stand against the mandated vaccinations. Delays could cause a shutdown tomorrow and throughout the weekend. South Korea has broken its daily record for coronavirus infections for a second straight day, with more than 5,200 new cases. The rapid Delta-driven spread comes amid the emergence of the new Omicron variant, which is seen as potentially more contagious than previous strains of the virus. It has fueled concerns about prolonged pandemic suffering. South Korea confirmed its first 5 Omicron cases on Wednesday night. They were linked to arrivals from Nigeria, prompting the government to tighten its border controls. With COVID-19 infections topping 70,000 in the past 24 hours, Germany is going to ban non-vaccinated people from non-essential stores, cultural and recreational venues. And Chancellor Angela Merkel says Parliament will consider a general vaccine mandate. This in light of concerns that hospitals could become overloaded with COVID-19 patients. Almost 69% of Germans are fully vaccinated. The government is aiming for a minimum of 75%. The British and Irish governments are expressing optimism that a thorny spat between the UK and the EU over Northern Ireland trade can be resolved. But Ireland's top diplomats said on Thursday that negotiations are likely to drag on into next year. Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney said the talks over post-Brexit rules for Northern Ireland had not produced a breakthrough moment. Speaking after a meeting with UK officials in London, Mr. Coveney said resolving the dispute by the end of the year is a very tall order and unlikely to happen. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has appointed a new Treasury and Finance Minister. This comes after Lutfi Elvan stepped down from the post as the currency has been tumbling to record lows. An announcement published in the official Gazette on Thursday said the president named Deputy Minister Nuruddin Nebati to the post. The Turkish lira has been plummeting to all-time lows. This comes over concerns about the government's economic policy following a series of cuts in borrowing costs despite soaring inflation. The Turkish currency has lost about 40% of its value since the start of the year. The Russian military has deployed coastal defense missile systems near the Pacific Islands, which are also claimed by Japan. And this is seen as a move intended to underline Moscow's firm stance in the dispute. The Bastion systems were moved to Matua, a deserted volcanic island in the middle of the Kuril Islands chain. Japan claims 4 southernmost islands. Russia's defense ministry posted a video on Thursday showing missile carriers moving ashore from amphibious landing vessels. They then drove up the coast to take up firing positions as part of the drills. Human Rights Watch says the killing of at least 65 protesters in Myanmar's biggest city on March 14th was pre-planned and premeditated. The group accused security forces of deliberately encircling and using lethal force against crowds in Yangon that were demonstrating against the February 1st coup. The report charges that soldiers and police armed with military assault rifles fired on trapped protesters and on those trying to assist the wounded. Scientists from around the world are flocking to La Palma, one of Spain's Canary Islands in the Atlantic Ocean. They are using cutting-edge new technologies and drones to scrutinize a rare volcanic eruption from land, sea, air, and even space. But predicting volcanic eruptions, and especially how they end, remains a huge challenge. Tel Aviv, Israel, is the most expensive city in the world to live in, according to a research group linked to The Economist magazine. The city jumped from number 5 on the list, vaulting past Paris and Singapore. Canadian cities didn't crack the top 10 list. 6 customers and 24 employees spent the night in an IKEA furniture store in northern Denmark after being stranded. The group was unable to leave after a storm brought in 30 centimeters of snow. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news from this past week. Have a great weekend, Canada. We'll see you next time.